Welcome to the Dear NICU Mama Podcast. This podcast is a safe place to connect with other NICU moms by listening to interviews with trauma-informed medical and maternal mental health experts, remarkable stories from the NICU, and intentional roundtable conversations.
Our hope is that you feel like you're sitting across the table from another NICU sister and feel seen and validated in your experience. No matter where you are on your healing journey, this podcast is here to remind you that you are not alone. Welcome to the sisterhood.
Hello, happy Wednesday. Welcome to the very anticipated part 2 of Carolissa's story. Aisha, how are you doing?
So excited to hear the rest of the story. I feel like we left everyone on a cliffhanger last week, so I'm very excited to continue hearing this amazing journey and to hear more from Carolissa and her experience.
Me too. If you haven't listened to part 1, we will make sure to take that in the show notes. We highly recommend listening to this episode. It blew us all away throughout it. I wish you could see Aisha and I's faces the whole time. Our jaws were on the floor. It was such a beautiful episode, and we can't wait for part 2.
Yeah.
I love it. And Carolissa, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
So happy.
Super excited.
So happy. Thanks for being willing to just plow on through to get these 2 parts put out there. It's honestly impossible to condense a NICU and birth story into 45 minutes. So It's very warranted that we have 2 parts.
Yes.
So last week, we left off after you had spent your first night after giving birth to Elizabeth and coming back the day after and things kind of taking a turn. And you talked about a nurse who was reminding you that the NICU was a roller coaster and that you kind of just have to take it a day at a time, and that Elizabeth is doing all that she can and is fighting, but her body is catching up to everything that she just went through. And so I was wondering if you could take it from there. That was kind of your first major setback, I would say, right? You're kind of thrown into this world of the NICU, and it was your first NICU stay, and you kind of expressed how heartbreaking it was to go down the next day and see her just so different from how you had just left her hours before. How did you process that, and how did you move forward, and what was on your mind in that time?
Definitely devastated. It's like all of my positive thinking that I had until this point was like gone. And it was hard because we made it this far, and we have just gone through in the last 24 hours the craziest events. And it's like, what do we do now? How do we make sure that she's like okay? And there was nothing we could do. It was just kind of like, well, you need to give her time. And that nurse was trying to impose all of this positive wisdom on me, and I was like, yeah, I hear you. But I wasn't really like hearing her, like listening, because I was angry. I was angry at the fact that this is where we landed, right? Because now like so much time has passed, and it's like the rush of everything that we just went through, we haven't processed. But we were like switched on to focus on Elizabeth and how can we make this better? How can we get her home? And it was just like, this is not the way this is supposed to go, right? And I remember she couldn't stay awake. And so they would have to give her, like, they had her in a high dosage of caffeine to just stimulate her brain to stay awake. And she was like that for like a week. And it was just like no progress, right? And I'm like, okay, well, what does the next week look like, right? Like, what are like the triggers or like any of the things that we're supposed to look for to know that we're heading in the right direction, or that she's getting better, or any of these things? And they didn't know. And I'm just like, okay, I am very frustrated. And I remember telling my husband, I'm like, how did we get here? I don't know how to help her, right? And he's like, I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do but to be here. I remember we had a nurse named Alexis, our first NICU nurse, and Alexis was an angel. I mean, hello, NICU nurses are angels.
Yeah.
But she was amazing, and she was just like, I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help her. And she's like, well, we can focus on the good things. And I'm like, okay, well, what is that, right? And she was like, okay, we can focus on the fact that so we tried a bottle feed, and she actually did really well. It was in the incubator, so I was like, I have a picture of my hands, like, in the incubator, kind of like, on one side, my hand on one side, my hand on the other side, trying to feed her.
Wow.
And she was actually doing really well at taking the bottle. And she's like, that is amazing, right? She's 31 weeks. She's just born, and she's taking the bottle. She's like, never seen that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so like, this is good. And she's like, yeah, this is amazing. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, you can change the diapers. And I'm like, okay. So we started doing that, and she's like, really like celebrate the little things. And I'm like, okay. So it was crazy because now, like, she was only drinking like milliliters, which is nothing, right? And my husband and I would be like, woo, right? Like, she did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't until much later that I was like, that wasn't even an ounce.
But still such a big deal.
Totally.
Yeah. Like, she made things such big deals that we were just like not even focused on the fact that it was like not even this much of milk or anything like that. Like, I would pour an ounce now, and I'm like, this is what we were celebrating.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, she was amazing, and she did get better. She did, the jaundice did get better. She was off all the lights. She was off of her sunglasses, looking super cool.
Spa time was over.
Yes. It was, ironically, my husband's cousin also had a NICU baby throughout that time. And they were in the NICU 2 weeks before we were.
Wow.
So we were only in the same floor for like a week, and then they got discharged. But when we were going through that jaundice week, they came over to visit us, and they're like, oh, she's sunbathing. And I was like looking at him like she's crazy, and I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh yeah. So their baby's name is Emmy, and he's like, Emmy was sunbathing too. He's like, oh, these cousins, they're just out here already being prima donnas. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, it was so helpful to have that like cheery outtake on it. And I was just like, you know what, it's gonna be okay, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna be okay. This is just another bump on the road. And we're gonna make it, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know how long that was going to be. But we were just like, let's just focus on a week at a time, right?
Yep.
That's all we can do, and we can accomplish that much. So we were super sad and happy for them, of course, when they got discharged.
Right.
Because they were ready to go home. But then it was just us. And so we went back to kind of like our routine because we still had Sophia at home.
Yeah.
And so we kind of fell into, Sophia goes to preschool. So we kind of fell into this routine where we would drop her off in the morning and then go straight to the NICU. So we would be at the NICU at 8 a.m. like it was our job.
Yep.
And so we would stay at the NICU throughout the whole time that Sophia was at school. And then we would both leave to pick up Sophia. We would go home. I would have dinner with her, and then I would come back alone to the NICU for the shift change. And then I also pumped. So I was pumping throughout the whole time. So I would do one of my night pumps there. I would leave the milk, and then I would go home for the night. And of course, I was like calling every like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it was just, I had missed out on so much on Sophia's like life. Because I was on bed rest for those 4 months. I couldn't do anything with her. My husband literally did baths, bedtime, took her to swim. He got to do everything. And that was also hard because it's like, that was something else that was taken from me, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I can't be a mom to Elizabeth and I can't be a mom to Sophia. It's like, well, what can I do, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those feelings are super hard to like navigate.
Absolutely.
So I remember I was just telling my husband, I was like, it's not fair. Like, you get to do all these things, but I don't want Elizabeth to feel alone either. So we just kind of fell into this routine. We would come home, we would have dinner. I would get her ready for bed, but then I would leave to go back to the NICU and he would still put her to bed. And she was very much used to daddy put downs. So she loved it. So I'm like, I don't want to interfere in what's already working for her.
Yeah.
But I did feel left out.
Yeah.
And so I would leave and then I would go to the NICU. I would meet the night nurse and then I would come. I would do that feeding if I could. And then I would go home. And I would get home pretty late. So I would get ready and then I would go to sleep and I would pump until I think I was up until probably like 12 a.m. I would probably sleep like 3 or 4 hours and then I would be up again to do the school routine with her in the morning and have breakfast with Sophia and then when we did that the whole Monday through Friday. Saturdays we would take turns. So I would do the morning and then I would come home, we would switch. So I would stay with Sophia the rest of the time and he would go and spend time with Elizabeth in the NICU. And that's kind of how we handled those 2 months where we were going back and forth. And it was exhausting.
Yeah.
It was so exhausting to have to go back and forth. And I wanted nothing more than to just be home with my baby, with all my babies together.
All together. Yep.
Yeah. Elizabeth had a lot of cardio issues too. And so with her, it was really weird. She had these 2 events where her heart rate just shot up to 250 and it just stayed there. And they could not get it down for any, it was like that for over 5 minutes. I remember they called her pediatrician up and they were like, hey, the NICU doctor, not her actual pediatrician. And she's like, I can't get it down. And once the nurse was like, the doctor, I can't get it down. And I'm like, what do you mean we can't get it down? Yeah. And so I remember my husband and she was just crying and crying and crying and we cannot console her. And I'm like, okay, what can we do? And she's like, I'm just going to check the chart. They did an EKG and they were running all of the stuff. And then she just stopped. And I was like, okay, she stopped crying. And I'm like, okay, is everything okay? She's like, well, her P waves are starting to come back, which I guess was a good thing. So she's like, we're just going to watch her for now and kind of just see how it goes. And I'm like, okay, well, the heart is pretty important, right?
Yeah.
If the heart's not functioning, then this is a problem. And she's like, it's okay. We're gonna keep an eye on her. And I'm like, okay. And I remember that day, I'm like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. Because what if she has something like this again, and we're not here?
Yeah.
And she did it. She had it one more time. Not as bad as that one. That one lasted a really long time, and her echo came back normal. They did ultrasounds of her brain bleeds, and those came back normal. She had most of her NICU stay was feeding, and I hear feeding being a big thing, right? Feeding is what takes everybody the longest to break out of the NICU.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. But she just we went from being able to bottle feed her and then to not being able to feed her at all. She was just Brady every single time. And we had 2 events where she coded. One was we were not there. They called us afterwards and I remember it was 10 o'clock at night and we were wrapping up things in the house and they called me and I'm like, oh, that's weird. They're calling from the NICU.
Yeah.
So I answered it thinking it was just oh, they're calling me for an update, right?
Yeah, right.
How are you doing?
And she was like, yeah. She's like, okay, I just want to tell you that she's fine. And I'm like, what happened? Right? Because you're starting off bad. And she's like, she coded, but she was only down for I think she said 2 to 3 minutes. We have her back. She's like, we're just gonna closely monitor her because they have two floors. They have like the second floor, which is like the ICU, like really intense floor where it's one nurse to a baby. And then the second floor is like for the NICU babies that are doing better, closer to discharge. And that's the floor that we were on now. And so I'm like, okay, I don't want to go back downstairs. Because if we go back downstairs, then who knows when we're going to go home. And she's like, we're just going to watch her and we're just going to keep an eye out for her. And then she was fine. We weren't able to feed her. They were just doing the 2 feedings for a while. And they were like, she just needs to rest. You need to give her time to rest. And I hated hearing that because it was like, okay, I understand that, but she was just doing so well, right? And I just hated being reminded of the fact that she isn't doing well, you know, and that she needs more time and that she's not where she's supposed to be, because it was just a reminder that it's my fault, right? Like she's not where she's supposed to be because of me, right? Which I know now that's not true.
Right.
But she, at the time, that was what it was. And I was just like, okay, well, we kind of fell back into our routine. I went back to looking for all the positives. She was gaining weight really well. And I'm like, okay, you know, we got 3 ounces, fantastic. And they would leave like these little notes on the door. And Alexis would do these like milestone cards for me. And so like she would be like, when she made it to like 6 pounds, she was like, she's 6 pounds. And when I would come in, she would paste them on the closet door and I would see them. And then one of the times she had like her hand print when she finally was able to do it, and her like feet print. And this whole time I'm like, you're amazing for doing this milestone card, because it made me smile. I was like, okay, you know, we're doing such amazing things. You're right.
Yeah.
So when we were close to the discharge, I think we were 3 days away from going home, right? And I remember I was like, I'm gonna take Sophia to swim, right? I'm like, she's good. We overcome a lot of the obstacles. We're close to getting home. We were doing feedings back on the bottle. And I remember I was sitting having lunch with Sophia after swim, and my husband calls me, and I'm thinking nothing of it, and I answer, and he's like, something happened. And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, I was feeding her and she coded. And I'm like, what? Like she had a Brady? And he's like, yeah, but she was like blue, like she wasn't responding. He's like, the nurses came in, and he's like talking to me, but I can tell that he's like holding back tears.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, we're not gonna be able to take her home. And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, like what happened? And he's like, she just wasn't responding. And so I guess they called like the Code Blue team, and they came in and they were able to get her back. But he's like, she's gonna have to stay a couple more days. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, I'm sorry. And I'm like, it's not your fault, right? Like it's not. We're trying to get her home, and it doesn't matter. I'm like, whether it's you or me or the nurses feeding her, it's gonna happen. And we know that. And he's like, he's like, she literally died in my arms. And I'm like, yeah, he's like, I don't even know how to process that. And I was like, just come home and we'll go home. And then I remember he came home and he just hugged me and cried. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Right. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry for the both of us, right? None of us asked to be here, right? This is something that happened to us, and it sucks. And we have to process it, and we have to move on, because Elizabeth's fine. That's the reality. The reality is that she's back, she's alive, she's fine. We can see her. And I was like, but I want to go see her. I want to make sure that she's okay. And so we processed that. I left to go to the NICU, and I saw her, and the nurse was like, you know, she's doing better. We're just gonna keep her. We're gonna have to keep her here a couple more days. And I'm like, okay. And it was heartbreaking because everyone knew we were bringing her home. So people were asking, like, oh, okay, do you have anything ready? Do you need everything? And then we had to tell everyone that she wasn't going to be coming home when we thought she was going to.
Yeah.
So that was super hard.
Yeah.
But after that, she didn't have any more episodes, but my husband didn't feed her again because he was terrified. He's like, I can't do it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I understand how traumatic that is. So I would do them, right? So I did all of the feedings, and between us and the nurses, and she did still have Brady's, but not like that. So we were able to bring her home. So it was just like graduation day.
And how many days?
56 long days. Oh my gosh, I missed this. So like throughout the 56 days, so she was born on October 10th, and Sophia's birthday is November 2nd. So for her birthday, for her third birthday, we gave her the surprise to come and see her sister in the NICU for the first time. And she was over the moon. Like, it was the cutest video of her coming in.
So
she
sweet.
Was my sister. Yeah, she's like, this is the best birthday present.
Oh my gosh. Replay that for them when like if they fight when they're older, be like, remember how happy you were?
Yeah.
The best birthday present ever. Look.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. She tried to read her books and sing.
That is so
beautiful.
Wow.
Well, and not to go back just really quick before the official discharge date, but I remember one of our NPs kind of sitting down with me when we got past like him needing to be on CPAP and my son could be just working on feeding. And she like grabbed my hands and she looks at me and she's like, this is when it gets hard. And I was like, excuse me, like this has already been really hard. Like this, she's like, yeah, maybe like the really big scary things are done. But now it's like we just wait. We wait for him to be ready. And it's like that like daily, like, okay, we did another ounce. We did another milliliter. Like we made it through a bottle feed without a Brady. And I remember that made it feel the longest because it's like you could see the light at the end of the tunnel, but that tunnel also felt so far away. And when you were sharing just about like 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, just kind of that like waiting, it's until you're a NICU parent, you really just don't understand how that feels. And really just like counting down the days, letting people know like we might be coming home on this date. Oh, actually it's going to be the next date. Like it's a really like your heart gets really excited and then just really defeated in the next, almost in the same breath sometimes.
It's almost like watching water boil and like, that you can't do anything to speed up the process, but you're just watching it anyway. And you're just like, when is, and also just, listening to you. I mean, Carolissa, you were spread so thin. My heart just went out to you when you were sharing about having to navigate being there for both your daughters and feeling at the same time that you weren't doing enough for either of them because there was just so much. How could you? You're one person, right? And I think that just speaks to a lot of our community and our NICU sisters who do have multiples, and I'm sure they feel and resonate so much with that. How difficult and how impossible that feels to be able to do it all, and I think that just so important to extend grace to yourself in those times because you are doing enough, and your daughters are so lucky to have you as a mom. It's just, again, I listen to you and it's just so clear to me how much you love them and how, throughout the episode, I keep hearing you say, okay, what can I do? What can we do? And that's just that mindset of like, I am not just going to sit and cross my arms and wait for something to happen. I'm going to take action. And that has just been your MO through this whole experience. And it just shows that you are doing more than enough. And I just wanted to say that because my heart went out to you as you shared that. I can't even imagine. So thank you for sharing that. And also that roller coaster of the NICU of waiting and being so close to coming home. And then, something else you touched on is kind of managing other people's expectations too, right? Because Elizabeth is loved by so many. Obviously, you guys have family and friends who are so excited to meet her and want to have her home. And that question that we all kind of dread of like, when will they come home? And you don't know the answer to it. And so that's just a whole other thing that us NICU parents sometimes have to carry. Also, like, we're managing people's expectations too. And that's hard. That's hard too.
Yeah.
It's definitely difficult. Yeah.
So beautiful. Well, okay, let's talk then. So you get the official discharge day, and because there's also that, like, you can't wait for that day to come, and then all of a sudden that day is here, and you're like, wait a minute, okay, maybe I want like one more day of just security, knowing that there's monitors and people to help at all times. So how are you feeling when it was officially time to go home?
I was excited. I was ready.
Yeah. I love you.
Yeah, I was so ready.
As the girl who walked to the NICU right after delivery. She's like, I got this, okay?
Yeah, I'm like, let's go. Honestly, though, I think we were both terrified of bringing her home and something happening, because we're leaving that security of like, okay, if it happens here, everything is here, right? Yeah. But at the same time, I was like, I'm so close to having my family together, right? Yeah. Being my girls together, being in our home. And that was a bigger feeling than that security. Yeah. I'm like, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. She's going to be fine. I actually had another really good nurse, Timmy, and she was amazing. She's like, okay, guys, you're going to go home. And she's like, Elizabeth, you're not going to do anything crazy to your mother. And she would always like talk to her. And she was really good. She was always like, she's like, I want you guys to go home, right? And she's like, she gave us like this bulb syringe. And she's like, she gave me like 3 of them. She's like, keep this everywhere you go. Keep one in the car seat at all times. Keep one in the diaper bag at all times. In her crib, in her change, like everywhere. She's like, this thing can be a lifesaver. And it's so crazy because it was the same thing, the same bulb syringe that my OB had used to take all of Sophia's like liquid out during her birth. So I was like, well, I mean, I know this thing saves lives, right? I seen that happen.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was like, I'm like, I can do this. Like, we can do this. We made it through almost 2 months in the NICU, right? Like, we can take her home and we're gonna be fine. Our family's gonna be together. And I remember like packing up all of her stuff. And I was like, okay, we got the photographer to come take her pictures, and Kimmy brings us this like little gown, like little graduation cap. And then I'm taking down like those milestone cards, and I am literally like just taking them. I flipped them around, and I noticed that Alexis had wrote a letter in the back from Elizabeth to me, on each of those milestone cards.
Oh my gosh!
And I was like in tears. I was like, oh my God! And my husband's like, what? I'm like, she wrote letters like on each day on the back, and because she had taped them on the closet, I never touched them. On one of them, it was just like, hi mom, I know you're so incredibly proud of me. Oh my gosh. I'm one step closer to coming home with you, and I cannot wait, right? And I'm like in freaking tears. I'm just like, how amazing is this? Like, how amazing is this? Because she knew that I wouldn't see it until the moment that we were gonna leave.
Yeah.
And she wasn't even there that day. I was like devastated because I didn't get to see her. And I would give her like the biggest hug. I'm like, that was so amazing to me to like take them all, because then I'm like taking them down, reading them. And I'm just like, for you to think about this, it's just like, they're really incredible. The NICU nurses are just absolutely incredible. And we were very lucky to have amazing NICU nurses.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and we actually got to leave. So
Mm.
Kenny's like, we're leaving. And I'm like, okay, we're in the wheelchair. Like, we're actually leaving.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So we left with her and we got home. And I remember Sophia was already here. So I was like, okay, go inside and tell her that Elizabeth's here, right? So she was like super excited. And we bring her in and she's like, oh my gosh, she's here. And I'm like, okay, but don't yell. And she's like, okay. And she was trying to be like super helpful. And she's like, what can I do? Can I touch her? Can I hold her? And Elizabeth's like this tiny little thing. And I was just like, yeah. And to me, I was like, she's such a big baby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Until I actually saw her like next to another big baby, like another like full term baby. And I was like, oh, she's not big at all.
Right, they're little peanuts.
Yeah. But it was super exciting
Oh.
to actually finally come home and
Yeah.
have like that moment that we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
so-
can see it all over your face.
Mhm.
Even you just talking about it, you're like reliving it and your face is like radiating joy right now. It's so beautiful. Wow. Girlfriends, what a ride.
Yeah, it was one wild ride for sure.
Oh.
It really was. Well, and as NICU parents, we all know that's like chapter 1, right?
Mhm.
It feels like 15 chapters, and maybe there is 15 chapters, but then you go to this, kind of next chapter of life at home, and all of a sudden you maybe have like a tiny bit more space to process and really just navigate everything that you guys went through. And so was it easy to find your new normal as a family of 4? And when did you really begin to process like everything that you had just endured?
Mhm.
Definitely not immediately.
Yeah.
I definitely went
Yep.
into, I was still in what can I do mode. I
Mhm.
think we both were. And we were just like, I was pumping, so we had so many things that needed to be
Yep.
washed. Like Elizabeth
Yep.
was on a different schedule than Sophia. She was feeding every 3 hours. And it was just like, how do we navigate my pumping schedule, Elizabeth's feeding schedule, Sophia's like schedule with playtime coming home from school and having to do all of those things and being in bed by a certain time. I would say I was very, very lucky to have my mom who came over every day and helped me. She would watch her at the house, and then that way when I would go to work and when I was ready to go back to work and I would come back, I wouldn't have to like lose any time trying to like bring her home or anything like that. And she would wash dishes and she would make the food and she would cook dinner. So she was a huge help to us. And I think that helped us a lot to try to be like, okay, we can navigate our new normal and we can have her home and have the girls home. And she was still very much having like the cardio issues where her heart rate was just super low and we could not bring it up to like a normal one without having to stimulate her or like, hey, we need you to wake up and we need you to do like, remember that you have to breathe and you have to do all these things. But we got through it. And then it just got easier as time went on in the sense that like managing both schedules just kind of became a thing, like the normalcy for us, right? And then we just started doing it.
Yeah.
One thing I wish I would have known is that life after the NICU is going to be hard. Because I think that for me, I was like, my biggest accomplishment was to graduate the NICU. And I'm like, that's the hardest part, right? This was the hardest part. But my first year out of the NICU was super hard. Yeah. Having to navigate work and Sophia's schedule and home life and taking her to all of those appointments were super hard. Like we went to 88 appointments last year. And so that was like 1 or 2 weeks appointments at a week, 2 weeks 2 appointments a week. I can't even.
Yeah, you're good. It's a lot of appointments.
Yeah, and there was a lot of appointments, and I was like in and out, and then having to go back to work. And my job is super like understanding and super flexible, which I am so grateful for. But it was hard. It was super draining, and I'm like, why did nobody tell me that like outside of the NICU was going to be so hard, right? I thought that I was home and my family would be put together and it would be fine, right? And that wasn't the case. Like we went from 2 specialists to we ended the year with 8 doctors on her medical team. She ended the year with the surgery too. So I'm like 1 year out right now. She just turned 1 in October.
Yeah. No, you summed it up beautifully. I think it's, as you're sharing, I'm just reminded of like just the different layers of acceptance that we navigate as NICU parents. The acceptance of, okay, this is my pregnancy. This is maybe not what I envisioned, but I'm going to accept it and, process that. Then it's the birth. Then it's the newborn stage, that time in the NICU. And then it's coming home and realizing, okay, our life still comes with these quote extras, extra appointments, extra specialties. And that just accepting that is there comes a lot of grief with that. And it's not out of an absence of pride. There's so much pride for everything that our babies are accomplishing and navigating. And again, just daily in awe of that little ounce, right? Like you're celebrating every single feed, every single milestone, but it comes with this layer of grief of, I wish this wasn't so hard for you. Like I'm so proud of you, but I wish that I could do more to make this easier. And so just like multiple layers of acceptance and just really like, it's difficult to accept it when we're just grieving what we thought it would all look like.
It is hard. And it's like we're super proud of how far she's come.
Always.
We've seen where she was, and like it's like, okay, now you're here and she's walking now. And we still have some stuff to work through. Like she's having seizures and we don't know why. So that's difficult because then we're like, every time we're like, oh, we're out of the woods, something happens, right? But it's always, we're trying to keep that perspective that it's like, okay, well, she's here. She's with us. She's, aside from this, she's absolutely healthy. She has a beautiful smile. She literally is our wild child. Super curious. And she's like, she wants to know everything and she wants to see everything. And I'm like, what happened. And we can't change that. And it's crazy as my husband and I would talk about it. And while we were processing, he's like, you almost died. And I'm like, yeah, I did. And he's like, I don't know what he's like, I was freaking out because I thought they were going to ask me to choose. And he's like, how do you choose? How do you choose between your wife and your baby? Like, I can't make that choice. And I was like, well, you look pretty calm to me. And
the smiling in the corner.
It's all about show for you. And he's like, he's like, it's hard. And you go through those traumatic moments and that's hard. And nobody else gets it, right? And that's something else that I had to learn early on. Like, nobody kind of quite gets what you're going through unless you've gone through it as well. And I think that that's okay. I've come to terms with the fact that it's okay for someone not to know what that feels like. That doesn't make it easier. Like, I wouldn't wish the NICU on anyone, right? But my feelings are still valid. I'm still allowed to be angry, and that doesn't mean that and not even angry, just sad, right? Like, that doesn't mean that I'm not happy to have her home, that I'm not happy that she's here with me, that I'm not happy that she's like overall healthy. It's still not fair, right? And that's okay to say. And I think that I've come to the point now where I'm like, it is okay for it to not be fair. It's okay for people not to understand. And I'm like, my husband is my best friend. Because he went through it with me. And so he gets it, right? Like, we're a team. And it's definitely made our marriage stronger. And he's like, we get it. and nobody else has to get it because they're our kids, right? And at the end of the day, we're their parents, and we're the ones who make the decisions. And this is our journey to go through together. And I think that there's happiness in that, because it is a well story, but if it didn't happen, we wouldn't have her, right? So, and everything, I am a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. Like, if my OB had not been like, no, we're admitting her for preterm labor, and had listened to the MFM and sent me back home, and then my water would have broken here, I would have not made it to the hospital. Like, all of that happened in the span of like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm like, even if I had called 911, they wouldn't even have gotten here and to the hospital on time for any of that to have happened. So it's like all of these things that happened the way they were supposed to happen. And of course, we're like realizing that afterwards when we're processing and talking.
Of course.
Like, okay, right. We were really upset about the way it happened here, but it's just like, it's a good thing that it happened the way it did. And it's like, it gives you a new perspective on life. And I'm like, we wouldn't have this perspective if it hadn't happened. And so like now we try really hard to like enjoy life more meaningfully. You know, like I try to purposely spend time with Sophia and Elizabeth together and just make family time and just really be mindful about what we're doing and making sure that they know that they are loved, right? And so I think that as hard as the NICU experience is, there's a lot of beauty in it if you really take the time to look for it. So going back to when I wasn't trying to listen to the nurse,
full circle.
There really was like full circle moment. She really did. After processing, I was like, yeah, you know, it is true. There is a lot of beauty in the NICU. A lot of miracles happen in the NICU. We witnessed it. And that's amazing. I'm only 1 year out, and I'm not going to tell you that I've truly processed the NICU because there are times where I'm just like, oh, yeah, everything's fine. And then, like, it'll hit me, and I would be just really sad about everything. And I'm just like, I just need to sit with my feelings, and it'll be okay. And it just hits you at different times.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think you said some important language that I want to make sure to emphasize is you said the word after, you said the word a year, you said the word time, as you've been talking about like when you've been able to process. And I think it's important to remember, especially for the moms that are in the NICU right now that are listening and they're like, will I ever feel that? You know, because when you're in it, you hear the comments like the nurse makes and you're like, okay, that's great. Now, you know, like you don't know my story. You don't know what I'm navigating, you know. But that's why we say healing is that lifelong journey, because sometimes it takes time. In fact, it should take time. It's a significant part of your story. And so to the moms listening who are maybe really fresh to their experience, it's okay if you're not at that level of acceptance yet. It's okay if you can't quite see it. And it's okay if it takes a little bit of time to get there. We all get there at different speeds, at different lengths. But the most important thing is that you're honoring your heart in the process and you're caring for your heart in the process to get to that next level of healing. And you're not alone in that healing. This sisterhood understands the mountains and the valleys that come with healing and the anniversaries and the birthdays and the Facebook reminders, like we talked about on the call-in episode about birthdays. Like it's going to be a continual lifelong journey. But the beauty of that is that it is because it's such a significant part of who and what made you a mom. And that is really, really beautiful. And so, I think you said some really important things about just the time it took to get to where you are at today. And that's really important to mention.
Yes. And I think also we always talk about the duality of emotions and that the presence of one emotion does not cancel out another emotion, that they can coexist and you can be frustrated and angry or sad about the experience that you had to endure and also be grateful and happy and, you know, feel all of it. It's not one or the other. You can have both feelings living in the same place. And I think it was just such a beautiful affirmation for moms that you said of, you know, it's okay to feel it. And you were talking about like when no one else gets it, like that's okay too. Sometimes you have to give that validation to yourself and say, no, like what I went through, that was real and it's worthy of my time to process, to heal. And it doesn't matter if anybody else ever understands it to the depth that I do, because as long as I'm doing that work, that's all that matters, right?
So beautiful. Girl, it's been an honor to share your story. I will go to bed tonight just like truly in awe of who you are and all you've gone through, and just so grateful to have you a part of this community and this sisterhood. And I just know that your story is going to bring so much hope to other moms. And as you were talking too, it reminded me of a podcast episode we did with Child Life on Call about supporting older NICU siblings at home while you have a baby in the NICU. And I'm going to take that in the description in the show notes as well, just because she gives some really practical tips. And one quote that she says in it is, she says, it's a lose-lose. If you're home with your baby in the NICU, you're losing out on time with your baby at home. If you're home with your baby at home, you feel like you're losing out on time with your baby in the NICU. And she's like, it's a lose-lose. It's hard. It's you know, like you've mentioned, it's not fair. It shouldn't be this way, but you are enough. And the time that you provide for both of your babies and both of your kids is enough. So I'll take that in the show notes as well. But so many nuggets of wisdom already, but one thing that we always do to close out the episode is just any word of hope or encouragement you have for another NICU mom. So what would you leave us with?
One thing I would say is that you are enough. I'm actually, like, you said that and I was like, yes, you are enough. The little things that you're doing is exactly what you need to be doing. It's enough. Is you're doing and you're giving what you can. And whether you think that you're drowning and that you're not doing enough, that's not true. Your babies, both of them, even if you have a baby at home or you have a baby in the NICU, they don't know the difference, right? They're just excited to see us. They're excited to like feel us and be with us, and always try to keep the perspective that your child loves you no matter what. And you are going to make it through this. You are amazing. And this is temporary. This is temporary. And whether it's 30 days from now or 5 years from now, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, I did it. I made it through. And I'm stronger, and I am resilient, and I am powerful, right? Because you are. You absolutely are, and you will make it through. You just need to hang in there, look for the positive nuggets in every day.
And with that, we close out part 2. We did it. You did it. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And to all of our moms listening that resonated with parts of Carolissa's story, we hope that you feel seen and heard, whether you have babies at home and in the NICU, whether you have just a sweet baby in the NICU, no matter what your journey looks like or how it unfolds. We just hope that this story of hope inspires you to take another step. You will get through this, like Carolissa said, and you are enough. So mamas, we will be back next week with another wonderful episode, but thank you so much for being a part of this community, and we can't wait to see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. If you loved this episode, we'd be so grateful for a review.
For more ways to connect with the Dear NICU Mama sisterhood, check out the links in the episode description.